Welcome back! Today we are diving deep on everyone's favorite topic, scales. Before we really get started, let's go ahead and address the elephant in the room and answer the question that lots of you are probably wondering: do you actually have to practice scales? Look, can you learn to play the piano without ever practicing a major or minor scale? Yes. Will you get there faster if you do practice them? Also yes. There are so many benefits to practicing our scales, but it's not always obvious, and we don't always make the connection of, yeah, I'm improving in this skill because I'm showing up regularly and practicing my scales. And I get it. I hated practicing scales when I was younger too. I didn't get the point. They didn't seem that difficult, but they also didn't seem that interesting, and it really didn't feel like it improved my life in any way. So I played my scales in my lessons for my teacher. She more or less accepted that, and life went on. But I can also promise you that you're going to make faster progress and you're going to start feeling more and more comfortable at the piano if you are practicing your scales on a regular basis. So, are scales fun? There are more fun things to do in life, but are they terrible? They're also not terrible. And you also don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Right? You probably, maybe you do, I don't know, but you probably don't adore brushing your teeth, but you do like the side effects of brushing your teeth, right? Your mouth doesn't stink, people are still willing to talk to you, you don't have to go to the dentist as often, and you don't end up with cavities. Scales can sort of feel the same way. If you skip them every once in a while, nobody has to know, but if you do them regularly, you're really going to develop a brilliance and a clarity in your playing that's really hard to develop in any other way. And before we talk about how you should be practicing your scales, let's just really quickly go over the benefits of practicing your scales. So I already said, you're going to feel more at home at the piano. If you're really comfortable moving around the piano in a way that really often appears in music, you're just going to be able to learn your pieces that much more quickly, you're going to feel that much more at home, and it's just these really tiny wins. From one day to the next, are you going to notice whether you practiced your scales or not? No, but over time, I promise, it adds up. Similarly, scales are really great for developing your technique if you practice them in the right way. If you consciously approach your scales and you think about how you're using your body to produce the sounds that you're making at the piano, you will start to see progress in your technique as well. And finally, and perhaps the most important, but also kind of the most hidden, is when you practice the scales of the keys that you're playing in, you're going to be able to understand the pieces much more quickly, because you're not going to constantly be forgetting your F sharp when you're practicing G major. You're not going to constantly be forgetting A flat when you're practicing a piece in C minor. You're going to find those things more automatically because your hand actually already intuitively knows where to go because you're really comfortable with the scale. If you're still with me and you buy into the fact that scales are going to help you, then let's talk about how to approach them. So if you are new to scales, I would 100% recommend sticking to one octave. And I would actually proceed in a very conscious way. Because when we're learning our scales, there are three things that we really need to make sure that we're getting ironed out. We want the right notes with the right fingering, and we want to keep it steady. And that's true whether you're playing right hand alone, left hand alone, hands together, 1 octave, 2 octaves, 3 octaves, 4 octaves. If you can check those 3 boxes, then you have mastered a scale and you're ready to take it to the next level. Be that taking a faster tempo, or putting your hands together, or moving on to 2 octaves. But always, always, always take this step by step. So scales rarely, extremely rarely, appear hands together in parallel motion in our music. We're almost always playing one scale in one hand. It doesn't even necessarily start on the same note as the scale usually would when we're practicing it. You do see it every now and then, but it's really not a common issue that you need to deal with in your music. So why am I telling you that you should practice these? Practicing scales together is an incredible coordination exercise because it actually is extremely difficult, even when you just stick to 1 octave. So if you find playing scales hands together in parallel motion difficult, do not be frustrated. It's not an easy skill. Slow down, practice hands separately first, make sure you master the basic skill, and then you're ready to build on that. So what do I recommend? I like a systematic approach. So for a couple of reasons, I think it's nice to start with C major, just because, not because it's the easiest scale to play, it's actually not. It's only white keys, it's a little bit awkward, the fingers don't fit super nicely into C major, but it's easy to understand. It's all white keys, and that helps us keep track of where we are a little bit, even though optically on the piano it's not necessarily the easiest to follow. We don't have to worry about any sharps or flats, and that has its advantages. So I would start with C major. If you're able to practice it hands separately and keep it steady, then you're ready to start putting your hands together. The first time or two, it's not going to be steady. Don't worry about that. As long as you're getting the fingering down, that's the first step there. So in general, we don't want to play choppy scales. That doesn't really help us very much. But when you're first getting started with a new scale, that's when you have a permission slip to not keep it super steady the entire time. You want to focus on the fingering. So what you're going to do is you're going to go hands together really slowly and just concentrate on where the changes of finger position are. So you start hands together, and then the right hand is going to cross under, and you're going to make sure you coordinate that. Move over, and the left hand crosses over. And then you play to the top. And the first few times you will have to consciously walk through that process, but you want to smooth it out as quickly as you can. How do we smooth it out? We go slower. And once you're able to manage in that slower tempo, then you can start to gradually build up your tempo. And once you're able to do it, I would say at least probably around 60 beats per minute, so like 1 beat per second. If you're able to manage 60 beats per minute, quarter notes, 1 octave, hands together, then you can maybe think about moving on to the next scale. That would look something like this. If you find reaching that point really difficult, then what you can do is actually start playing your scales hands together in contrary motion. That means you're going to be starting with your both thumbs on a C, whether you start on the same or on 2 different ones, it doesn't matter. And the nice thing about contrary motion is, on the one hand, it's much easier for our brain to control because our brain is much better at contrasting movements than it is at parallel movements. The other thing is you're going to have the same fingering the whole time, so you don't have to worry about coordinating finger changes, because when you play 1, 2, 3, then both thumbs are crossing under. 2, 3, 4, 5, and then going back down, it's the same. 3, 2, 1, cross over with the third finger in both hands. 2, 1. And that's much simpler for the brain to manage. It's much simpler to keep under control. And once that feels comfortable, then go back to practicing the parallel motion. Also, I'm listing these things as if you should do A, B, C, and then D. Of course, you're free to do all of these things at the same time also. If you feel more comfortable kind of testing out all of them at the same time, by all means go for it. You don't have to stick just to C major before you have it really perfectly ironed out. You can start on the next scale because the principles are the same. The principles apply to every scale, especially the ones that use this sort of standard fingering. I'm happy to make a more in-depth tutorial on scales in general and fingerings and the order you should learn them in. I do really recommend learning them in the order of the circle of fifths, just because it really kind of teaches the logic behind the scales also. If you're interested in a sequel to this video, drop a comment below and I'll be sure to get that out in the next couple of weeks. Once you've done all of those steps for C major, then go ahead and move on to G major. And from G major, you can go on to D major, and from D major onto A major. And the nice thing is you're just adding 1 sharp every single time. And the other nice thing is the new sharp is always the next to last note as we're going up. So in G major, F sharp is the sharp. We keep that F sharp when we start D major, and C sharp, the next to last note, is the new sharp, and so on. That repeats throughout the entire sharps series. Once you get to the flats, then we have to kind of adjust our strategy and talk about those things. But again, I'm happy to make a longer form tutorial on all of the major and minor scales and how you can approach learning those. This is really just a where should I start and what are the steps I should be taking while I'm practicing. All right, if you've made it this far, you understand why you should be practicing your scales and how you can get started with your scales. And now let's talk about a few common mistakes that I see students make a lot. So the first thing I've already mentioned a few times is not keeping their scales steady. I see so many students sit down and show me their scales, and it goes like this. Starting and stopping anytime there's a finger switch. Don't do this. It's a little bit like riding in a car with someone who's driving a stick shift and they don't really know what they're doing. That's me. And it's just a jerky, it's not a nice experience. It's not fun for you. It's not fun for anyone who's listening to you. Just go as slowly as you need. Take your time. This is not a race, especially in the beginning. There will come a point when you want to build up your tempo, but don't do this start, stop, start, stop. Think about the fingering. Okay, I can go again. Just don't do it. You're not helping yourself, you're just slowing down your progress. The second mistake that I see is not prioritizing fingering. We already said the 3 criteria we need for really ironing out our scales are the right notes, the right fingering, and keeping it steady. Keeping it steady tends to be the most common mistake that students make. Underestimating the importance of fingering is the next one. And if you want strategies for ironing this out, for most of the scales that start on white keys, we have a standard fingering, and you should probably start with those scales just because they're the easiest to follow. It's another reason to start with C major, because then you have C major, G major, D major, A major, E major, before you ever have to change a fingering. Those 5 all use the exact same fingering. So for the right hand, that's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the left hand is actually just the inverse of that. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1. Now most students don't have issues with fingering when it's just 1 octave hands separately. Sometimes 1 octave hands together, it already gets a little bit dicey. One way to fix this is to focus on the 4th finger, because the 4th finger in most scales only ever plays 1 note. So if you know exactly where your 4th finger needs to be, then anytime you're about to use your 4th finger on a note that doesn't belong to the 4th finger, then that kind of helps you catch yourself and get back on track before you actually commit the error and really make sure that you're ironing out that fingering as you go. Mistake number 3 is starting too fast. Often this comes from just not really thinking ahead and not choosing your tempo consciously before you start, which by the way you should be doing. But that's one reason that a lot of students don't keep their scales steady. They are kind of overly optimistic, hope it's going to work out well, and then start, oh, wait a second, and then they have to find their way. Make sure that you think about the tempo that you know you can play your scale in and keep it steady before you start. If you look before you leap, you're not going to run into this issue. Last but not least, another common issue is that students kind of lift their fingers way up from the keys, or they try to do this curled fingers approach, which is very tense and also hard to control. And the idea, and I said earlier, if we practice our scales in the right way, then it's going to improve your technique like you wouldn't believe, because it's just an isolated exercise where you can really focus on making sure that you get everything evened out. So, if we don't want to be picking up our fingers way far away from the keys, you don't need to worry about keeping them super close either. I don't really believe in micromanaging technique, because I think when we focus too much on the technical elements of what we're doing, we tend to tense up and overthink, and that overthinking leads to more tension and just kind of builds into this spiral that we don't want to deal with. Even when you know the scale well hands together, keep practicing it hands separately so that you can focus on playing with a really natural hand position. What is a natural hand position? This is a natural hand position. The fingers are curved, but they have, I don't like saying the fingers are curved. I think that often gets misinterpreted, and then students tend to make a claw. We don't want that. We don't want this claw. We don't want tension in the hand. The natural curve of your fingers is if you stand up And you let your arms and your hands rest next to your body, and then you pick up your hand. That's the natural curve. You want to see it from both directions. It's nice and relaxed. The fingers aren't stiff. They're not stuck in any position. And that's what we want when we're playing. Also, we're not just playing with our fingers. You're playing with your arm and using the weight of your arm to help depress the key. And if you approach playing your scales with that intentionality, making sure that you're keeping your hand in the position that you want it to be, then you're not going to mind going slowly. Because yeah, practicing slowly can be boring. But if you have a purpose for going slow, if there's certain things that you're paying attention to, then all of a sudden the time is filled. It's all of a sudden you have a purpose of how you're using the time. And that's so incredibly valuable, and that really helps you develop your technique, and you're going to learn the scales faster, and it's not going to feel as boring, and it's really just a win-win-win. This is by no means an all-encompassing scale tutorial. I hope that you have some key takeaways that you can apply today to your practicing. And if you have more questions about scales and how to approach learning them and what order you should learn them in and how the scales are built and whatever questions you have about scales, let me know in the comments below. And like I said, I'm happy to turn this into a series, into as much information as you need on scales. And until next time.